This week on The Destination Angler.
And when we see fish rising, I want the anglers to stop for a minute, and we're going to figure out how the rhythm of that fish and literally hunt it and then throw a cast to it after we watch it come up and feed a couple times. And I think what that does is helps gear down the angler. It's like, yeah, we all want to catch fish and we're out here, that's the goal, but the other side of it is the beautiful landscape and whatnot. But the third component of that to me is like, let's try to understand the fish's rhythm. Let's start unlocking where we're seeing these bigger fish hold at. Let's try to figure out if they have points. Let's start talking, having that dialogue in the boat. And that helps translate to a much more successful day when it comes to fishing.
And that was Tyler Nash on the St. Joe River. And if you like the show, would you please share it with a buddy? Thank you. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of The Destination Angler, brought to you by Adams Built Fishing Gear, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear built to last at an affordable price. And by Angler's Coffee, fueling your next cast with amazing coffee delivered to your doorstep one batch at a time. Get started today and save 20%. And by Got Fishing, crafting world-class fly fishing adventures specially designed for your level of experience and budget. And by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping trout anglers avoid the crowds and explore new public water. Download it in the App Store today and get 20% off using promo code DESTINATION20. Up next on the Destination Angler, we journey to Finland for some incredible brown trout fishing. Then we're back up in Montana to check out the spring creeks around Lewiston. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode on the Stillwater River in Montana with Chris Fleck. The Stillwater is one of Montana's best-kept secrets, with prolific hatches, spectacular scenery, and relative solitude. And now you can watch Bending Hooks on the Youghiogheny River with Rob Walters on YouTube. You won't want to miss these shows. And today our destination is the Idaho Panhandle and the wild and scenic St. Joe River. And our guest is expert fly angler, guide, and all-around great guy, Tyler Nash, owner of White Pine Outfitters, Moscow, Idaho. Flowing 140 miles, mostly through the Idaho Panhandle National Forest, the St. Joe is an iconic Westslope Cutthroat trout fishery known for gin-clear water, rugged beauty, and unforgettable dry fly fishing. Tyler grew up in Colorado, living the Western outdoor life most of us only dream about. He spent his school years fly fishing and hunting, often with the help of his dad, who would pull him out of school on a regular basis to tag along on these fly fishing and hunting adventures. After guiding backcountry hunters and riding rodeo bulls for a time, Tyler made the crossover from rigging horses and bulls to rigging boats. He followed his wife-to-be to Idaho to chase his dream of building a fly shop and an outfitter business. Today, Tyler unlocks the St. Joe from top to bottom, sharing his unique guiding style, along with stories of the Grand Rhonde, rainbows and steelhead, and an epic tale of a sunken drift boat, a soaking wet client, and a police helicopter. As a bonus, we get to hear how he built his fly shop and outfitting business from the ground up, and let's hear from Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? Glad to have you on the show.
Absolutely, Steve. I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah. So this part of Idaho, I got to admit, I've never been up here. And I was reading a copy of Fly Fisherman magazine. I came across this article, Shadows of the St. Joe. And I'm like, the St. Joe? There's a St. Joe River in Michigan that I live a little closer to. No, that's not the one. This has got mountains and, beautiful scenery. And it's the St. Joe River up near Coeur d'Alene and in the Panhandle of Idaho. So, we've gone from never hearing about it to doing a show on it. So I'm really excited to have you.
Absolutely. No, the shadowy St. Joe, it's one of the most iconic Westslope Cutthroat trout fisheries, I think, in North America. Getting clear water, lots of cutthroat. So you can't go wrong coming up there and casting a dry fly to these beautiful fish.
All right, I want to get into that, but first, I usually don't start off with my guest bio, but yours is different. I want to talk about your bio for a minute because you're living the life, man. You're living the life a lot of us outdoorsmen wish that we were living. I think. I don't know. I don't know you that well, but let me just tick this off a little bit. So you're from Colorado. It's a great
Yeah.
state, right? You grew up fly fishing in places like North Park, the Yampa, Grace Reef, the Mile, and the North Platte. Your dad used to, I think it was your dad, used to take you packing into the wilderness areas on horseback, chasing elk as a
Yeah.
youngster. Then you go to Wyoming and Nebraska for deer hunts, geese along the Front Range, turkeys in the spring, and trout all summer. That sounds pretty good. And you own a fly shop
Yeah.
and run an outfitting business. So, man, how many days a year do you spend out in the field?
So this last year was probably my best year, like 180 days guiding, running trips,
Really?
training. We're still in the process of training a lot of guides. So I spend as much time as I can and that to me is the most important thing. If like on my days off, if I'm still out fishing and hunting, I'm doing something right. Like I
Yeah.
enjoy it that much still, even when I'm not per se guiding. I'm still out there doing the same things.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right. Well, before we get into the St. Joe, Tyler, I wanted to ask you about the area up there. So there's a bunch of really fantastic water up there. And I noticed on your website, you guys are doing a guiding not only on the St. Joe, but a bunch of other rivers. And I wonder if you can kind of just talk about the area, like the Panhandle of Idaho. What makes this area such a mecca for fly anglers?
I would say, boy, after moving out here from Colorado, just how vast this landscape is out here. You drive down along the Front Range and you got Interstate 80, 85 up through Wyoming and Montana, anywhere you go. Here it's all highways. And basically when you go south of Boise, you drive up along rivers almost the whole way until you get into Lewiston, which is a half hour south of where I'm at. So you have the Payette, you have the salmon, you have the snake, you have the Clearwater. And the salmon and snake Clearwater are all greater drainages of the Columbia River.
Yeah.
And so we get a big run, anadromous fish run up there. So that's our salmon and steelhead, right? Like iconic game species. And we love chasing those. That's a half hour away from my house. And so to kind of dive into some of the other trips that we offer, we run steelhead and rainbow trout fishing trips on the Grand Rhonde.
Yeah.
And so I guess we got to zoom out just a little bit further because the North Idaho Panhandle, like state of Idaho here, we live right where my index finger is on this section, right?
Yeah.
So
for you folks on YouTube who can see that.
and from there though, we drive into Oregon, which 3 hours over to Enterprise, and you jump in the town of Minam, and you do a 40-mile float. That's the upper wild and scenic stretch. It's a roadless stretch. So that's where we tend to chase, do our multi-day trout and steelhead trips.
What river's that on?
The Grand Rhonde.
Oh, that's the Grand Rhonde.
On
Okay.
the Wallowa. And the way stream orders work, right? So you have a small stream order is a one, and then when the Grand Rhonde dumps in from river left, it's a larger stream order. So that's why the Wallowa turns into the Grand Rhonde River at that point. And that's about 10 miles into that float. So day 2 typically. And those trips we run those in June into early July, shut it down in the heat of the summer, and then pick it back up again in the fall for the October caddis hatch, and then steelhead once the steelhead move into the system. And then the other river that we guide a lot on, this is both for upland game birds and steelhead and smallmouth bass, is the Salmon River. And the Salmon River is pretty unique because it's the second deepest river gorge in America, and it's also the longest free-flowing undammed river. So I mean it's breathtaking.
Yeah, is it?
And that stretch of water that we jump on, it's down south of us a couple hours towards Riggins, which is a one-horse town with no stop sign or no stoplights or anything like that. And it was so fun when I first moved down there to start guiding. There was no cell phone service, and this was, I don't know, 2011, I guess. Yeah, 2011. And you get down there and it was kind of like, it reminded me when I was a kid, because we'd make plans with each other after we got done guiding for the day. And that's like, you stuck to that, didn't just text one another. So it was like That's one of my favorite parts about a lot of places that I still guide in Idaho is that there's no cell phone service, so it does make logistics pretty challenging. We tell each other we're going to meet somewhere we actually.
You got to do it. And if the guy's an hour and a half late, you can't find out why.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds pretty good. Like I said, there's another thing I love about you. You know, you're in an area with no cell phone service.
Mm-hmm. I love that. We spend, finally got some Starlink up at our river lot on the St. Joe, so I can actually conduct some business up there. But prior to that, I was going into a bar, and they still got a bar that you can smoke cigarettes in. But they have internet there, so I buy a beer and send emails and whatnot.
And smoke a cigarette. What's the drinking age in Idaho?
It's 21. Yeah.
And how old do you have to be before you can go in a bar, like till like 11 o'clock or something? What's the rule there?
It seems like depending, some of these small towns, they don't seem to mind. I'll see little rugrats running around in and out of the bar there. It's like, stepping back into the 70s. So it's a unique place.
Yeah, I think in Montana, I don't know if it's like this anymore. In Montana, it was no minors allowed in the bar after 11 p.m.
Yeah.
And I remember taking my 12-year-old son in there on a trip, and we're like, okay, it's 11:15. How do you want to handle this, me and my buddy? And I said, let's not say, is it okay? Let's say, do you mind if we can bring our kids in here? And the guy's like, yeah, sure, come on in.
Right.
So we were in there, till like 1 o'clock, having a little fun with the 12-year-olds, and nobody cared. So
no one cared. They were just happy that you were in there, doing visiting, and the locals are always excited to meet some new folks, and
buying a moose drool, Okay, so that's the area, and how is the steelhead fishing?
So the steelhead fishing is pretty good, but steelhead fishing, like if you go out, it's not a numbers game. It's if you go out and you get a pole in a day, or you hook one fish, like that's a good day on a swung fly. And our numbers, I just got some data from the state of Oregon, and it looks like they're going to be pretty consistent with what we had last year. But I mean, those numbers ebb and flow quite a bit depending on the ocean conditions, and there's a lot of other variables that fall into that. But when it comes to steelhead, like I think coming out here to the Pacific Northwest, more or less, we're on the fringe of that inland Northwest. These fish move 400 plus miles to come up.
That's amazing.
Systems, and the Grand Rhonde is an iconic fishery. The fish will come up and eat a skated fly, quite aggressive, and if you don't get them on a skated fly, you can swing a small traditional through there and then dredge if you want. But for the most part, we don't fish dredgers a whole bunch out here like Skagits. It's mostly Scandies or more traditional mid-belly lines. And the Clearwater, for example, we fish a lot of really small stuff. And I guess a lot of those rivers, I'll run them a little bit different. Like if I got one person up front, maybe with the skated fly, and I got two anglers, and let's say that we're both going to move down through a run. So meaning casting, quartering down, and let it swing until it's parallel with the bank, right? The angler coming in behind, I might have them on like a poly tip, a light poly tip that sinks down just a little bit further, and a little bit different profile, bigger profile fly, or
something different.
Something different, because you're just trying to entice that. Steelhead remind me of a cat with a laser, and you're looking for that, you're shining it, and sometimes the cat's pretty lazy, but you entice it just right, and you move the laser, and then it's going to go chase it, right? And
that's great.
That's what we're always looking for, is that player, that fish that's willing to chase that fly and come grab it,
Yeah, that's cool. What's your best fish this year? Your best steelhead?
My best steelhead, I would say my favorite one, I just got back from Alaska. I was up on a live-on with some friends of mine that run Tongass on the Fly, and they're based out of Petersburg, Alaska. And so we took a mothership boat 75 miles, and we went and fished uncharted rivers. Some of them don't even have documented steelhead on them, and we found fish in rivers that don't have documented steelhead.
Nice.
So it was a lot of hiking through muskeg and whatnot, and it was just something totally different than what we have out here. And what that did for me is to catch those fish that we hiked from the brackish water, from like high tide. We hiked from saltwater 4 miles up a stream until we found plunge pool and found fish up there, and then hiked back at the end of the day at low tide and had to walk another 1.5 miles because the skiff was tied up way down the bank. But I'm like, it was just such hot fish. And what that did, though, is put everything in perspective about how hard those fish have to work to come up to our system here. and just really unique fisheries. I don't know, diehard steelhead angler. Love.
Sounds like you're into it, man. That's awesome. Hey anglers, if you're on the hunt for fishing gear that's as tough as you are, look no further than Adams Built Fishing Gear. Since 2014, Adams Built has been the go-to choice for anglers who demand quality without breaking the bank. Their lineup of lightweight waders, high-quality nets, and meticulously designed fly boxes is second to none. But here's what really impressed me. Adams Built stands behind their products like no other. Every single item is guaranteed to last. Yep, you heard that right. And get this, Adams Built waders even come with a lifetime repair replace guarantee, with you only paying for shipping. Now that's a deal you can't beat. So why settle for gear that won't last? Make the smart choice and gear up with Adams Built Fishing Gear today. Ask your local dealer for Adams Built or visit www.adamsbuiltfishing.com and tell them Steve sent you from the Destination Angler podcast. Hey folks, Angler's Coffee wants to fuel your next cast with great coffee delivered to your doorstep, one batch at a time. Anglers has been hard at work making great new coffee blends, such as the Stimulator Blend. This high-octane coffee has a delicious smoky flavor with 25% more caffeine. You know, sometimes you just need a little extra kick in the morning before you wet a line. Or how about the Rainbow Blend? Colorful and bright, this medium roast draws inspiration from the vibrant traits of the iconic fish. Much like the rainbow trout's vivid hues, you'll experience flavor reminiscent of the brilliant colors the trout is named for. And if you like it dark and bold, check out the Brown Trout Blend. This roast brings the spirit of the elusive brown trout with rich, dark chocolate notes, boldly intertwined with subtle smokiness, mirroring the rugged landscapes of the deep waters where brown trout thrive. And with every sip of Angler's Coffee, you support great conservation groups and charities such as the Mayfly Project. So head on over to anglerscoffee.com and fuel up today. Take 20% off your first subscription order by entering the code BREW20 at checkout. All right, let's talk about the St. Joe. What gets you so excited about fishing on the St. Joe? What makes it so amazing?
So the St. Joe is such an incredible river because it's gen clear water, and cutthroat trout they oftentimes get a lot of negative press, and they're like, oh, they're dumb fish. I don't think that that's the case at all. They're extremely aggressive fish that come up and smoke dry flies. So April, right now, this time of year, we start getting March browns that pop, and then squallas, and there's also winter stoneflies. And the winter stoneflies are small black ones, and then the squallas are bigger. But when the squallas start popping, that's like those water temperatures that came up at 40, probably 42-degree range. The river's on the climb, and those fish are they haven't seen a fly, most likely 3-4, probably 4 months, and they're ready to eat, and they tend to just be extremely aggressive, and the river's up a little bit higher, so we get these side channels, and you'll slide the drift boat in on the bottom side of these braided channels with a bunch of willows kind of growing out of them, and just cast right up into there, and there's just fish popping.
Nice.
And that doesn't even put the other fish down. We've spent 2-3 hours in one spot, because an old saying that I love to live by is like, you don't leave fish to find fish, right?
Sure.
Like, man, it's getting late. We gotta move down the river.
Yeah. What do you do about that? I mean, you got to do 10 miles, to finish your trip. You just going to come home late then?
Yeah. Then you just sometimes come home late. And
I like you already. That's awesome. Not many guides say that. Most guides like, no, we're not being late. We're going to get home at 5.
We got to be off at this time. I would say, here's my guests that have been coming with me for a long time that are like they became friends. Sometimes we definitely will fish quite a bit later,
Is that right?
Yeah, there's a friendship and camaraderie there that's been built into things, But I mean, the St. Joe is so incredible because I believe it's about 154 miles in total length. Freestone River comes off the Bitterroot Mountain Range, so that separates Montana and Idaho, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually, here's a weird tidbit. It's the highest navigable river in North America.
What's that mean exactly? When people say navigable, I'm always like, what does that mean? Like they used to roll logs down it in 1900 or what is that?
And logs down it and whatnot, and U.S. Coast Guard kind of thing. But that's such a fascinating, because I've looked into it, and there's still some gray areas that I don't even want to speak to, because it's kind of confusing sometimes of how they designate one river navigable from others. But anyway, that's like a neat little tidbit. The fact, though, that it's 154 miles, and the upper reaches of it are pretty consistent riffle, like steeper gradient, riffle run, riffle. And then once you get down in the below Avery, it starts to open up a little bit more, and you get these like longer, so a nice riffle run and a big glide. And so you're just moving, and that old saying too, the foam is home. And it's such a good river to pick apart and put your anglers on just amazing seams to catch fish. And the fact that the water is so clear, you'll see the fish come from sometimes 5-6 feet, just and slow takers, heartbreakers. That's what we like to say.
I love that.
And so they're coming up, and it isn't just out in cutthroat during certain times of the year. I'd say a lot of times they're in a little bit slower moving water. So I will find them in heavy chop, but like when we fish the Grand Rhonde, I'm always looking for like that heaviest chop water.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, and I want to get those like off of a color transition, where a shelf drops off, heavy weights, and just sink those things in there. And that's when those rainbows will crush.
Oh, you got rainbows too?
Yeah, not up on the St. Joe. I'm bouncing around a little bit, but when the cutthroat trout fishery is so unique on the Joe is that a lot of times those fish are in a little bit slower moving water. So it's like, you get a good presentation of a fly and just send it in there and watch it drift. And, one of the important things to me is like, because that water is so clear and it doesn't tend, we don't tend to get a lot of, I'm one of 2 licensed outfitters up there. So it doesn't get a lot of pressure. And when we see fish rising, I want the anglers to stop for a minute, and we're going to figure out how the rhythm of that fish and literally hunt it and then throw a cast to it after we watch it come up and feed a couple times. And I think what that does is helps gear down the angler. It's like, yeah, we all want to catch fish and we're out here, that's the goal, but the other side of it is the beautiful landscape and whatnot. But the third component of that to me is like, let's try to understand the fish's rhythm. Let's start unlocking where we're seeing these bigger fish hold at. Let's try to figure out if they have points. Let's start talking, having that dialogue in the boat. And that helps translate to a much more successful day when it comes to fishing. But yeah, it's like in that, like, we don't need these huge, we don't get significant hatches. I mean, we get bugs, but it's not like what I used to see down on the Gunnison River in Colorado, where you look up and the whole sky is just like covered in bugs, But those fish out on the Joe and we're getting these hatches, and they're decent hatches, right? Yeah. But they'll come up and they'll grab those dry flies, and like I said, it's a real slow. You'll watch them come up and eat, and just drop back down. And we'll watch them do that a couple times and then cast to them. And the fact that the water is just that clear makes it super. It's just
exciting,
incredible experience.
Yeah. So do you think when you slow your clients down, do you actually do better? Like go slow to go fast almost?
Yeah, I think, no, that's a great question. And I think because what that does, yeah, absolutely. It helps us like have a better connection to the place that we're both at, and I'll tell you how that came to be when I've been getting more and more into saltwater fishing over the last few years. And like, there's bonefish right here, and I'm casting that bone, and it's like the guy's like, "Don't cast that bonefish," And
why not?
And I'm like, why don't I cast to that? And so that's some of the most important things when you're guiding. And what that did, and it's like you're out on the big salt pond, and it's like there's nothing to really even see there. It's just this vast big flat, and you're just sitting there staring. Hunting, and it's like, nope, can't cast to that fish because it's positioned the wrong way. And so I'm like, how do I bring that back and use that same skill set that I learned there to help kind of slow things down? And then, because like in the salt, you're watching the fish characteristics, what it's doing. We're gonna wait it out, and maybe sometimes it'll cut back and it'll get into a better position quartering to us, and then we're gonna make that cast. But we're not just gonna see. And then that was like, up on the Joe, fish rose right away. We're not casting that fish. That fish has to come. It came up to eat something, and it's got to settle back down again. One thing for certain I'd say that we can predict most of the time with trout is that they're always looking up. But if they come up and eat a fly and they drop right back down, that fish it's got to settle into it.
Yeah, it takes a minute. Sure.
It takes a minute, So yeah, we slow down, and then we're sitting there talking, and I think that allows us all to kind of enjoy the day a little bit more.
Maybe, do you find that some clients are kind of come to you, they're a little stressed out and they just haven't quite gotten into the rhythm of of de-stressing, and maybe you got to slow them down for lots of reasons, you know.
Mhm. I think that's happened. So, in my years of, I don't know, over a decade of guiding and whatnot, most of the folks that come out on trips with me work pretty high profile jobs. So they come out and they're like, they're very good at their occupation. They're typically good at golf and a couple things that they do. And all of a sudden they're like, maybe they've never fly fished, right? Because we work with this dude ranch a lot, Red Horse Mountain Ranch, that is based out of Hayden. And so they get folks coming in from all over the US, predominantly the East Coast down in Florida. And so I tend to get a lot of surgeons and lawyers from that, and they come out and they fish with me, right? Like it's a Tuesday or Thursday thing. And so I have a good relationship with the dude ranch there, but a lot of them have never fly fished before. So, that's the whole thing. And they're like, I've watched the video, I've done this, I watched River Runs Through It. And like,
so I'm good. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Take me
I'm
fishing.
good. And I and then success is oftentimes there's this, there's a, our goal is to catch a fish. And it's like, that's what my main focus is. And it's like, wait, let's just slow down and try to understand more about that. Because then once you put eyes on that, along with then kind of, it goes full circle, and people then start to understand how it is that we target these fish to get.
Yeah, you're teaching them something.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's super cool. How remote is this area? I mean, I'm thinking the Panhandle is like super remote, but Coeur d'Alene's a big town, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's so the town of Calder doesn't have cell phone service, and it's 24 miles away from St. Mary's, and St. Mary's is like a 3,000, maybe, and they might have, they're about 3,800, and it's based on a logging industry. So they have a big plywood mill there, and and that's 80 miles away from Coeur d'Alene. So we don't have cell phone service up there. We're pretty darn remote.
What about aren't there like dozens of miles of river that don't have a road? You got to hike into them.
Yeah,
on the St. Joe?
Absolutely. That upper river. So at the end, it basically Red Ives. There's a stretch that is probably 25 miles long that is roadless. And a couple of my buddies have gone in there a few times now with pack rafts, and pack rafted that upper river.
Cool.
It's absolutely gorgeous,
Do you take clients up there?
No, I don't take clients up there. Idaho's fascinating because it's like, and it's good. It's actually a really good thing, but everything's designated in between sections. So we happen to have the license that we have is for SJ3, which is from Avery down to St. Joe City. So we got 40 miles of water that we can fish. And then the outfitter that has a permit up above us, he can only do walk and wade. But having Idaho outfitter licenses is a lot like owning a liquor license. They're pretty regulated, and they tell us how many launches that we can do a day, and then no one else can come in and obtain permits and so on and so forth. But with that, then they also regulate it quite heavily. Like I said, that upper stretch, there's no float boat fishing. Everything's walk and wade. And there's only a couple outfitters that run permits up there. But let's go back to the end of the road scene. There's an old guy, him and his wife have ran a lodge for a long time, and the only way to get in and out of there is by horseback, and it's up above Red Ives. And so they're about 7 miles up, and it's this old cabin that's been grandfathered in. And you ride horses in there with a pack string and whatnot, and put you up and do home style cooking, biscuits and the thing. And
that's awesome.
We used to run a big game outfit out of there too, but then sold that, and anyway, still running a couple of cutthroat trout fishing trips up there a year.
That's awesome.
Pretty neat history.
With so much information out there, it can get darn right confusing and even overwhelming to find the right fishing adventure. Sorting through all the options and fees can be quite the headache. Well, not anymore. I'm super excited to introduce Got Fishing. Got Fishing is a boutique booking agency for world-class fishing adventures around the world. They ensure that you are on the exact fishing trip that meets your skill level, budget, and desired experience. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, Got Fishing's personalized service will help you decide which adventure is the best fit for you, your group, or even your business. Worry about fees? Worry no more. With Got Fishing, you won't pay anything extra because their services are entirely free for you. You see, Got Fishing exclusively partners with highly reputable outfitters who gladly compensate them for their services, ensuring a win-win situation. Explore the range of fishing adventures and learn more about the services Got Fishing provides at gotfishing.com. That's www.gotfishing.com. And check them out on Instagram too. Do you struggle finding new trout streams to explore? Tired of stumbling around country roads looking for access points? Looking to escape the crowds? Then look no further, because Trout Routes has meticulously mapped and classified over 50,000 trout streams covering the entire lower 48, including 350,000 hand-curated public access points marked and ready for you to explore. I'm a huge fan of Trout Routes because they make it so easy to explore new trout waters. Many times, Trout Routes has helped me find new public water and get into fish fast. And the good folks at Trout Routes have been busy this winter making Trout Routes even better. Enter Stream Cards 2.0, the latest iOS release that brings together more info at your fingertips by organizing data like stream flows, access laws, nearest fly shops into easily accessible tabs for every river and stream in the app. And now you can check real-time stream height and flow rates with river data from stream gauges and compare those with historical data to spot trends. Pretty cool, huh? Planning a trip? Well, you'll love the advanced filter features that let you hone in on top-rated streams, boat ramps, camping spots, and more. So what are you waiting for? Start exploring today by downloading Trout Routes on your Apple or Android phone. Tell me about the scenery. Like, if for someone who's never been there, right? I mean, imagine it's pretty rugged, but can you just kind of describe it?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start because I love wildlife. Right up above Avery, I typically always see mountain goats. So there's a canyon stretch, and that stretch in particular, it's kind of a slot canyon and off on river left. So if we're looking down river, the left-hand side, I usually always see a couple mountain goats up there. And it's just big pine trees. So ponderosa pines, Douglas fir, tamarack. Okay. And in the fall, like I said, I grew up in Colorado, and so the aspens change color and it lights up, right? And I know that back east and whatnot is beautiful. Our one tree that kind of does that where we're at here is the tamarack, and it's a softwood that's used for the timber industry.
Yeah.
And anyway, it changes gold in color, and it's beautiful to see. So you got the sea of green, and then all of a sudden you'll just see these gold trees, and they lose their needles in the fall. So cool. I love how treed everything is, and yeah, gorgeous landscape up here. So.
In the water, I was reading about this. The water is kind of a greenish tint in the St. Joe. Is that true? Why is that?
So that greenish tint is, I think it's just the substrate that's on the bottom, and it's mostly clay loam in our area, so we don't get a whole bunch of agriculture runoff and erosion and whatnot. So it just tends to run really, really clear. And I think what gives it that greenish tint though is just your substrate, so your rocks that are on the bottom.
Okay. Can you say a little bit more about like the character of the water? Like when I start up in the walk and wade area, like how wide is it? How deep is it? What are the flows? And as I get down into your area, how's it change and what's it kind of look like?
Okay. So, up on the upper stretch there, and I'll give you kind of a Eagle Creek up in that zone. It's probably, in a lot of areas, 30 20, 30 yards across. And what I'd recommend for anybody that's coming up and they're wanting to wade fish, anytime that it's above 2,000 CFS, it's sporty. So you kind of got to wait in that upper stretch of the river anywhere if you're wade fishing until it drops down below 2,000 CFS. The upper stretch, though, tends to have a steeper gradient, and you get a lot of big boulders, pocket water, and just nice bubbling riffles, and hold a lot of fish. Cool. And once you get down into the depth wise up there, it's pretty neat because there'll be some big plunge pools that are literally like 15, 20 feet deep. And I've snorkeled a fair amount of it, and it's pretty awesome because you'll see northern pike minnow, which are kind of neat. A lot of people frown on northern pike minnow, but they're like the world's largest minnow. So they're hanging out down there. And then you get cutthroat, and you can see 20 feet down with your snorkeling gear on and kind of understand more about where the fish are holding. And we'll kind of boogie down into the next run. But I can't get over about how deep that some of these areas are. And there'll be like hard bedrock down there in certain sections. But yeah, I mean, we're talking dropping off. And I'm thinking one spot in particular at Slate Creek. I've spent a lot of time snorkeling in there. It's probably 20, 25 feet deep. And that's it. low flows, so we're down at 400 CFS.
Yeah. And as you go farther down, how's it change?
So downriver, we start to get more cottonwoods. It'd be more characteristic of like a Montana river system where you have a lot less gradient and you'll get a nice riffle that turns into a run and a nice glide with a tail out. And so these things last anywhere from, I'd say the longest runs down there are like 300 yards long.
Oh, really? Wow.
Chop water, and then those will start to mellow out and then drop into another one. But yeah, you get those, you get the fish holding in those tail outs, you get them fishing up higher. And when we roll into later on the season, so to dissolve the oxygen when it's colder out, it disperses throughout the whole system better. But as the water temperature is warm, those fish will migrate up to where the dissolved oxygen is higher. And you typically see that in that water that's broken, right? Because that broken water is helping that oxygen to turn in it. So those fish will move up higher into that zone. But yeah, I mean, all the way down to 16 mile, and we'll fish it lower than that occasionally. But until you get down to 16 mile, you have pretty continuous riffle run with these long glides and then tail out, right? And that stretch of water to back up just a little bit where it starts to open up and it has more like the characteristics of kind of a flatland river would be around Marble Creek. So Marble Creek is like really where the canyon starts opening up and you start to see more of the cottonwood trees in there. And you don't feel like you're in this tight canyon that up above Marble Creek. I think that's where it really gets the name, the shadowy St. Joe, right? Because it's it's tight canyon.
Oh, that's cool. And then you've got bull trout too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Get a few of those unicorns a year.
Okay. Is that right?
So,
And you can't target them, or you can?
You can target them out here. And, we tend to catch them on bigger streamers. So when we're streamer fishing, that's when we get them. Every now and again, they'll eat a big patch rubber leg too. But we have a good number. Idaho has some of the best water in I'd say in the lower 48 for bull trout.
It's high quality water, you're saying?
Yeah, the high quality, because bull trout, they're an indicator species, basically, just like a whitefish is, right? Like those, you got low anthropogenic impact, like most likely colder water that's dumping in. You're highly likely in our area that there's going to be some bull trout in those systems. And those are adfluvial fish. Some of them out migrate all the way down to the reservoir, down to Coeur d'Alene, because the St. Joe does dump into Lake Coeur d'Alene. So they'll migrate all the way out to there and then move back up. There's fall spawning fish. So
okay.
Fall.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you've got your predominant fish is the Westslope Cutthroat. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to the point of so last year, bull trout, Shelby was guiding some clients and we were taking off, and this goes full circle about getting off the water late, and we were, I got off the water and it's like 45 minutes and I'm sitting there just chatting with the clients. I was like, what happened to Shelby? Like, what is going on here? There, she finally comes rowing down, and I'm like, what are you like? Hey, everything good? She's like, oh, we had a huge bull trout chase a cutthroat. And she's like, we sat there for 45 minutes trying to get that fish to eat and switch it over to big streamers and never did end up getting it. But that happens a couple times a year where, my predominant focus in there is chasing Westslope Cutthroat.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're fighting one in a big bully.
And you see a big flash.
Mm-hmm. It'll either come grab the cutthroat or you see it chase it and then it turns at the boat and it's gone, So
yeah, right.
And at that point it's like, okay, let's switch gear. But a lot of my cutthroat trout flies and whatnot, even like the streamers, they're like mini sex dungeon size, so a 3.5 4 inch streamer. Those bigger and the large bullies will eat those. But if they're moving towards a 14-inch cutthroat or 12-inch cutthroat to eat that, I'm not typically carrying my huge streamer box with me. So it's like it can be mute to get them to eat those smaller streamers. They're looking for a little bit bigger.
They want a bigger. They don't want a cheeseburger. They want a steak.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe 2 of them. All right. And how are the tributaries? I've heard some of them are pretty decent.
Yeah. So I would say all of the tribute, the larger ones. So Marble Creek fish is pretty darn good. And then there's Big Creek that's right by our camp. That stream tends to hold water. And those fish, they're getting ready to spawn here pretty soon. So they'll move into those tribs and then spawn and out migrate usually by early June. So if you're up there and you're looking for more of like a pretty good hike, like a little bit of type 2 fun, going up and just beating out the brush and going chasing cutties in those larger tributaries, definitely it's an incredible journey. So a lot of fun.
And public access is decent throughout the St. Joe and the tributaries?
Yeah, I would say the public access is really good about 5 miles above Marble Creek all the way up. Once you get down below that, there's quite a bit more private property, but Idaho, as long as you're below high water line, you're good to go.
Oh, is that right? It's kind of like Montana then.
Yeah, just like Montana,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I got to ask you about grizzly bears because you're right in the heart of grizzly bear country, aren't you? Have you seen many?
So, no, I've not seen any grizzly bears
None.
here in our part of Idaho. Now,
Wow.
they're up a little bit further north, and it's like I used to guide big game hunting down the Gospel Hump, spent a lot of time guiding Hell's Canyon all over the place, and I have not seen a grizzly bear yet. The largest population is down there in south in southern Idaho, in like Henry's Fork zone and whatnot.
Oh, it is over there, really? Yeah. Okay.
North Idaho does have some documented bears, but we haven't seen any down where we're at. But black bears, definitely see some black bears. There's actually the density of black bears is high.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Do they mess with you in your camp at night?
No, we've never been messed with in the camp.
Good.
Which is really good, but I know some bear hunters up in our area, and in the St. Joe has probably the longest black bear hunting season in all of Idaho, so they're constantly up there hunting. And but it's such a dense, thick forest that you typically don't see them. Last year, one of my young guides, Patrick, him and I were running up on the St. Joe doing a training trip, and we saw cinnamon colored black bear. So you'll see a lot of colored phased bears in our area too.
Oh, that's cool. That's great. Can you kind of walk us through the seasons just so people can understand just at a high level, like what are the major, hatches and whatnot and flies that you're using throughout the year?
Okay, so I'll start in the spring then. In the spring, we start seeing squallas and winter stoneflies, and then there's March browns. And that starts in April and then goes into early to mid-May. And by that time, mid-May rolls around and we get a couple weeks of high water. And the way I've kind of described things now, like hatches, it's give or take a week or two. It varies like every year a little bit. And then June rolls around, and I should mention in the spring too, we get some blue wing olives as well. So but our predominant hatches then springtime would be March browns, winter stones, and BWOs and squallas. June rolls around and we start to get a good number. We start to see caddis, pink alberts, and then we get some golden stones. Those start popping off too. Every now and again, I'll see some salmon flies, but it's pretty sparse. So fly hatch, we don't have a huge number of them. And I'll tell you, like, some of the reason why I think some of this stuff happens is like we don't have a lot of nutrient loading in the system. I mean, it's not like some of these bigger systems where you get some agriculture input and things like that can actually enrich this. It helps with the densities of bugs and whatnot. So I've been told it's like we're getting all of our runoff and whatnot. There's no abutments, there's no dams on the system, so it's like the hatches vary quite a bit, but they're
pure nature,
just the nature of the beast. And June though, the caddis, pink alberts, and golden stones, and then we start to roll into some PMDs, PEDs, pale morning duns, pale evening duns, and that runs into about the middle of July, and then things really shut down. You're into the dog days of summer so fish and hoppers and so on and so forth. And one of my favorite times though is like in the fall, So September timeframe, we start to get the mahoganies, which small mayfly, brown in color, size 16. And that to me is when those fish really start getting active again. Then ambient temperatures drop down at night. We tend to get our first frost, and we start to get a lot of those mahoganies. There's also a spruce moth.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's been debatable. I've heard a couple different names, but for simplicity, yeah, like I've always called it a spruce moth, and I don't see it every year, maybe every couple of years, and it's like probably size 12 or 14. And the fish really keening on those. And then October caddis. So
okay.
blue wing olives in the fall as well.
That's a good rundown.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say some of your top confidence fly patterns are? And are any of them kind of a local flavor, a local tie?
So we have a variant of a squala that one of my guides ties, like with a bullet head. That's pretty darn good. And yeah, I like that fly a lot. And then what I tend to do with any of the bigger foam bugs, or from tying bugs now, is like I want pretty sparse. So instead of the big fat foam chubby Chernobyls and stuff like that, I say that because I tie when I can, but I also run for businesses. So if I'm getting flies from MFC or whoever we have them from, I got my scissors with me and I doctor those things up. So I'm slipping down the body. I'm giving them, yeah, they're getting cut down a little bit.
A little haircut.
And anytime the chubby Chernobyls tend to really produce, and we'll run those with a dry dropper system, and that's our go-to. So
how selective are the fish? Like what X are you using?
Here's the thing, like that's a great question. When it comes to anytime I'm running big foam bugs, I'm always trying to fish 3X, because what happens if you drop down to like 4X, 5X mono, they'll spin like this.
Yeah.
I love legs, and I tie loop clinch knot, and 3X tends to line it out there, and you're not going to get the fly. If you ever pull your tippet up or your leader and the whole thing is spun up like this and you're fishing 5, it's like you need to drop down 3X even.
That's a great tip.
And that's what gets that thing. It splats it out there, and it's not going to spin. So that's kind of in terms of leader shy, and that goes back to that thing too. If I'm seeing fish coming up, and I typically I'll prospect with like a dry dropper, but if I have to prospect, meaning I'm not seeing fish come up, I'm either nymph fishing or run a dry dropper, right? Most likely I'm going to lean towards running nymphs, and then when we get into really good water that I know I can bind them with dries again, then we'll switch over to that. But that's kind of, running. So in terms of leader, I typically run 2, mono to my dry fly if I'm running that dry drop, and then fluoro to my dropper, because it sinks, fluoro drops.
Okay. Yeah.
Better, so, and I'll drop down with that like 4X, but I typically don't go below 4X with most of my flies.
You don't need to then, huh?
You don't need to. And it's also, it's Westslope Cutthroat, and I mean, they're aggressive and ready to eat a pretty well presented fly. So I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's a great way to get folks into fly fishing too, because you get to see the fish come up and eat the fly, and you're getting to fish this water. A lot of times, as I was describing it earlier, it isn't like complex. Like I'm trying to find pretty consistent flow. So I always tell my guests, like, if they're new, it's water that's moving away from the boat. We get super systematic about it. I'm like, we're not going to fish that water up there, because you're going to have a harder time getting your fly to float there. So it's like, I'm looking for water that's moving away from the boat, then that keeps that fly in the zone longer, that isn't really complex, with like a rock in the middle and then a seam on this side. I'm like, I will pass over that rock with newer anglers to go get us into the areas where then it's like, then we're systematic about it and we're synced up. Okay, we're going to fish that. And once they get that unlocked and we can do that, then we level up, right? So, okay, now we'll start fishing more complex water. But you throw an angler into super complex water with opposing drifts and whatnot, that is water that's moving towards the boat, your drift is so short, and let's say that they can only cast 10, 15 feet, like we're reducing the amount of time that flies in the water, which then reduces the opportunity at catching fish, right?
Yeah.
Just getting more systematic about that stuff, like help folks have a successful day.
Yeah. You said unlock. You're trying to unlock these techniques for people. I remember when you and I talked about a month ago or so, I remember you used that term to unlock the river for people. That's how you think then?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like everything's kind of gridded out, and I'm still, it's guiding's a super fascinating thing to me because they're helping me unlock the river every day to learn more, right?
They are your customers.
Yeah, the clients are. It's like, because yeah, I have my techniques that I'm deploying out there, but they're the ones with the fly in the water, and I'm coaching them through something. And it's like, wait a minute, I know that I might not go catch those same 3 fish off that point. Like, let's say that I got my favorite spots, my A, B, and C spots. Like, if I hit this run really hard one day, like one of my general rules is I'm not going to go back and just beat up that same run the same way the next day. We might only do pass through there and catch one fish, but it's like, if those fish aren't eating, it's like, wait, this worked yesterday, why isn't it working today? Well, the clients with the line in the water, they're the ones that are fishing it, listening to my coaching. And it's like, okay, well, that's not work. Like, we're going to go into plan B now,
Yeah.
And so I think it's like, it's guiding's a lot of managing expectations, but then getting synced up, right? And the quicker and the more that the guide and the angler gets synced up, I think that just things meld, and you get those. Oh, and it's the funny parts on the Joe is like, especially with the dries, I'm looking for points a lot of times if I'm running like a dry fly. It's like, okay, I need you to cast there. Do you see that branch? And I'm always calling that stuff out. And it was like, yeah, you see the branch that I'm talking about? It's leaning out over that run. And then there's that foam line. And so that's like 20 or 30 yards down in front. I need you to put the fly there. And if they put it there and then all of a sudden the fish eats, they're like, oh, you knew that there was a fish? Well, yeah, because I've caught a fish out of there in the last week and a half, three days or whatever, So it's a probability game, but it's like, and then there's trust that's built on.
You start thinking, oh, this guy knows what he's
Yeah,
talking about.
he knows what he's talking about. And then it's like, the more then that you get synced up with that, and then the laughter comes, and it goes back to saying earlier, it's like clients show up and they're pretty nervous and things like that, and they have these high expectations. It's like, okay, so it's always unlocking things and figuring out how people learn too, right? Like, that's what gets me kicking, is like, I want to understand how they learn, and if I can understand how they learn, we collectively can have a pretty successful day.
Yeah. What are some of your most memorable client moments? And I want to ask you another question after that, which is, what's like the dumbest thing you've ever done with a client?
Okay.
Nothing, right?
Yeah, nothing. Never anything silly with clients. I would say one of my most memorable trips is several years ago when Sierra and I, we'd already got the St. Joe permit. Okay, is this off record? So are we going into stories now?
Let's do stories. Yeah.
Okay,
that's
stories. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of my most memorable stories is Sierra and I had already had the St. Joe permit, and I wanted to get a Grand Rhonde permit too to expand our operation. And the only permit that I could that literally I could afford at the time and make happen was a Grand Rhonde in Oregon stretch. And this wasn't the wild and scenic stretch that I described earlier in our story. This was basically like, let's say it was 10 miles of Oregon water, So these guests, and Tyler, it was another guy by the name of Tyler. He was going to graduate school at University of Idaho, and his dad's a lawyer, David, down in California. And they've done a couple St. Joe trips with us, and they're like, hey, we want to book a Grand Rhonde trip, So, all right, let's go. And they're like, what dates, Tyler, are good? And I'm like, still trying to unlock that river and a little bit in over my head, in all honesty. And I'm like, late October, November, that's like highest number of steelhead basically are in there. And they're like, let's go on Black Friday, And I was like, all right, Black Friday it is. So we get together down on the river. I have them meet us at a rendezvous place, right? And we jump in my rig, and I've already established a shuttle and whatnot. And we hop in, and we're floating down, and we're fishing through this good run, nymph fishing at the time. That was like, with clients back then, that's all that I did when it came to steelhead fishing. And Tyler hooks a whitefish, and I thought he had a trout at first, because whitefish will pull pretty good and they'll fight a little bit. And I'm like, oh, you got the whitey. Well, I got the whitey in the net, and I'm talking to him about whitefish, pretty cool species too. Like, that's the one thing I always talk up native fish, because I really like them. And again, like, a whitefish is it's an indicator species for a healthy ecosystem, And so David's in the back of the boat out looking over like this, and I bump a rock with a raft, and he goes and just dumps into the river. And it's Black Friday, and it'd been snowing that morning and stuff. And the water's probably only 3 feet deep. He just comes up and goes
A little cold.
like grab him. It's so cold, and I pull him up on the boat and I row over to the bank really quick. And he's like kind of in shock, a little bit embarrassed. I was like, we'll get a fire going. And if, and I didn't ask him how he's really doing. I just like got him a coat really quick and sitting there like, oh boy, this is going to be an interesting. And this was pretty early in the morning. Well, we got a fire going, and I always carry an extra bag with me, a dry bag. I call it a tipper bag. And one of my long-term, he's a school teacher down in McCall, taught me this, like, so it's a dry bag that usually has a thermos in it and a bunch of extra clothes when you're doing like fall and winter stuff in case someone falls in. And it's hodgepodge. It's like you go to our consignment shop. We also own an outdoor consignment shop. You just buy a bunch of fleece and you throw it in the bag, and you're like, I don't care if it might look like it might not fit, but that's what you're wearing. So we got him dried out. And, at that point when the fire was going, getting him dried up enough, I'm like, do you guys want to keep fishing today, or how do you want to handle things? Because we can row out if you're too cold. And he's like, no, I think I want to fish. Well, we move down into this. We get back on the boat and start fishing again. We get into one of my favorite runs on the Rhonde, and we're doing our second pass through there. And all of a sudden, David's bobber drops, and the steelhead comes up, and it's tail walking across the river.
Cool.
And he landed his first steelhead, and he's traveled all over the world to fish with his son. And he's like, we got done that day, and he's like, this was my most memorable trip that I've ever had, just like the swim,
the
whole thing, So
the guy that went in said it's the most memorable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that how it? You're like, okay, I'm gonna get a tip from a guy that I soaked,
That I soaked. He fell out of the boat, And I think sometimes like those are just those amazing trips that when stuff, it's maybe not in the brochure, right? Like but it makes people realize like how we're not in control of a whole bunch of things, and all of a sudden it's I always say one of my, like, it's all good until it's not, right? And usually just going through and then it hits you like that, and it's like, okay, and it's how are you going to recover, right? And it just was amazing. We were able to get over there, get them dried out and get back to fishing.
Nice job. Okay, what about, would you be willing to tell that the drift boat that sank story?
Yeah, I was I'll tell that.
Sure? Okay, good.
So I guess here's being that we're done with that Grand Rhonde story, this is probably one of my favorite stories in the last 5 years of guiding. So a few years ago, I was out on the river with a client of mine who's became a friend, Ryan. He teaches at the law school here in town, and him being a law student teacher it'll make sense here after a little bit. But he came out with his dad, and his dad lives in the Midwest, and they've been doing trips with us for a few years. And we put in up at Avery, and this was 2020, and we had a really high water year. It was a high water year, and coupled with cold spring. I mean, it was still in the 40s May, and I was up on the upper. I put in at Avery, and typically I don't like to fish Avery until it's below 2,000 CFS, and then we fish it until it's about 650 CFS out of the drift boat. And that's low. When I say 650, like if you ever took a drift boat up in there, you got to be willing to beat it up pretty bad.
Oh,
like
man.
You're getting some chine damage.
Yeah.
But there was just a couple things that I was like, I got to go up there and just fish it. And Ryan was also game to go up there, but I was like, hey guys, it's going to be high water, and it's like casting close to the bank, and we're just moving. I can't slow the boat down enough to run more laps in here. It's just like cast, go. And we got on, and as soon as we got on, it was just like lights out, boom, boom, boom. And I'm fishing a chubby, and sometimes like back to flies that I like to fish real quick is like a really slim profile, all foam, kind of looks like a chubby Chernobyl, but this one was purple and short on it. And I don't want it to float really high. Sometimes I want it a little bit more saturated and float just below. It's just the top is barely sticking up. And so we're fishing this purple bug, and it just was producing one after another, and we'd had doubles on, and we pulled over to do a nice shore lunch, and everybody's like recounting how good that the morning was. Like I was just in awe, because I went up there kind of on a whim, mostly because Ryan's like, I wanted an adventure today. And I was like, well, let's go float up there at high water as long as you're down. Like I've fished up there a bunch this year. So I kind of was telling him, leaning towards it probably was just going to be a mediocre day. And then we were all just pleasantly
Lights out.
how good it
Yeah.
was. So we get back on, and like I always do like a nice hot shore lunch with we bust out a stove and make street tacos or ahi tacos. And one of my guides that worked for me 4 years, like he was making, because like we live in wall tents up there on the river, right? Like we got to the point where we were making creme brulee at night in water baths, and we'd take those on the river with us and got a creme brulee.
Man, really?
And he always just called it burnt cream pudding. So we have a burnt
more
cream
accurate term,
lunch, for North Idaho, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, it's like we finished lunch and we get back on the water, and it's still red hot, and him and his dad have a fish on together. So it's like we've had multiple doubles. Well, I get to this area that's like the gradient starts to pick up, and it goes back to the shadowy St. Joe. There's like a flat light, and the sun is off to the side here, and so I don't have like that shadow that you'll pick up sometimes when it hits the river, right? Like you don't see rocks very well, right? And so I got my sunglasses on, and Ryan's fighting a fish. We were on river right, and I got the boat kind of spun sideways, and it's high current. It's there's a lot of water. So I'm like telling him to yard that fish in, and I come off of this. So I was off to my right side, and I'd been looking down if there was any rock, and net the fish. And I'm like, oh no, there was a rock that just we'd swung the boat into. And I'm like, high side. So they jumped on the high side of the drift boat, and immediately the upriver side of the boat, because we're just like pinned on a rock right here, and it didn't poke a hole in the boat or tear it. It literally just sunk the side down. We took on water, and I was like, guys, we're sinking the boat. And and I was like, I got on their life jackets really quick, and I said, swim to river right. And I kind of just held on to the boat, and I was watching all my stuff go down the river, And I'm a Scott pro, and I got Scott fly rods in there, some centrics and hatch reels, and like it's my whole office, right? I'm like watching stuff float down river, and I was like, yeah, I just sunk my boat. And I'm watching them, and I'm like, swim hard towards river right. The river's starting to pick up gradient, and it's coming down, and I see some big rocks off to river right, and I got the anchor rope. And this is the fascinating part about a drift boat sinking. It doesn't sink like it sunk a little bit, because it's got the compartments, right? Yeah. So it sunk a little bit, and then I was like riding it kind of like Captain Jack Sparrow, I like to say, and singing, and it's like knee deep, and then it's thigh deep, and then it's like chest deep, and I can't ride the boat anymore. And by this time I see that we're close to some I'm close to some big rocks. I've rode it as far as I can. So I swim the anchor rope over to some rocks, and I dally off of rocks and slide it into an eddy.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, and save the boat. So it's like, it was so crazy, because it's and that was into one of those big deep pools that was probably like 20 feet deep.
Yeah.
As soon as I got the anchor around a rock, because I rodeoed when I was younger, so it took me
really
rodeo days. I was like, come dally off, and it slid into the side, into the eddy, and there it lied. And I was like, oh my goodness, I just saved that. I saved my boat.
You did save the boat. Did you like that day? Did you and your clients bail the thing out and get it floating?
Here was the thing. So then all my gear is floating down river, and there's some guys fly fishing down lower, and they see some Yeti coolers, and it's like a garage sale, Yeah. And I'm like, and so they come running up, and I'm like, hey, would you guys give us a ride down to my truck? And they were like, yeah. And I got to back up just a little bit. Like it was a casual day. And in the drift boat, when I'm fishing, like I'll take my flip flops off, and I'm just barefoot, just like hanging out, enjoying the day, getting some sun. So I had no shoes on, and Ryan and his dad had to like scale up this big kind of rock ledge because it's steep canyon. And so they had some like small contusions and some scrapes, on the bottom of my feet are bloody because I got no shoes on running down, trying to get these guys.
So nobody had waders on.
No one had waders on. No, I typically don't have my clients fish waders on the Joe, because we're not doing a lot of wade fishing, unless they indicate that they want to wade fish. Well, these anglers gave us a ride down to my truck, and I got all my riggings. Like I did swiftwater safety classes a while back to keep all those certs current, and I'm like, time to rescue a boat. And Ryan's dad does HVAC stuff, construction, and they're like, we want to help rescue the boat. And I'm like, sweet. So yeah. So we hooked up a bunch of rigging, and it just so happened where the boat sunk, it was roadside, and there was a big, like the guardrail that goes around the road, so it saves you from going into the river. We just ran several hundred feet of rope around one of those with some carabiners and did a directional pull, got the boat floating. And anyway, I'll never forget this, like, because my life flashed before my eyes. I'm like, I'm taking a lawyer down the river. I just sunk a boat with him,
right.
And we got the boat floating, and I remember I went over and gave him and his dad a hug, and I was like tearing up a little bit, and like long, like, thank you guys so much for the help. Thanks for being good listeners. I mean, that as a guide, like, what's important things is we synced up with everybody, and when things really hit the fan like that, to have some clients not only that I love to fish with and do things, when stuff really goes south, like for them to trust my judgment and everything like that, and help make a situation like that as seamless as possible. I mean, there's a lot of trust, camaraderie that's been built from guiding,
So they didn't like march off and say, I'm never coming back here again. They were like, actually, I'm more into this than ever before, huh?
They were more, and then they were like, they were gonna book a Grand Rhonde trip with me the next year, but then Ryan's dad's been having some health stuff going on. So anyway, still keep in contact with them a little bit. And that was super important. But so I had to get my boat out right after it sunk. And of course we got it floating. I had to go back down and get a spare set of oars from our boathouse at the river lot that we have. And so I'm rowing down river, and it's kind of like, it's like an Easter egg hunt. I'm finding some fly box. I found a cooler. Didn't find any fly rods, but I go down to Blees and go saltwater fishing. I found my Mary Sharp's like hot sauce that I always carry,
Oh, good. You got the hot sauce. Okay.
Excited about that. And I got to the takeout at Marble Creek, and we always like drive with the boats covered there because it's super dusty roads and everything. So it's 8:30 or 9 at night, and I'm just like whooped, And so I get the boat covered up, and I get back on the main road, and then I got to cross the river one time to head back to camp at Big Creek, and I pull off at the stop sign, and I get surrounded by a SWAT team with like M16s and full on SWAT gear on, and I was just like, what? And there's a helo flying overhead, and I was just like, my day couldn't get any more interesting at this point.
Can't make this up.
One like pretty aggressive guy comes up to me. He's like, where are you headed? What are you doing? And I was like, man, I'm an outfitter up here. I guide fishing trips. I'm headed down to Big Creek where I live for 4 months out of the year. Well, where's that? And I was just like, where's the sheriff? And he's like, what's under your boat cover? What's in your truck? And I was like, look, don't touch any of my stuff right now. Please go get your sergeant, because I just had a really long day. And so finally the sergeant comes over, and I was also frustrated because if they had a sheriff there, I know the sheriff's in that area. And it's like the guys that they had there, they had one mission, and they don't know anything about landmarks or anything like that. And I'm like, look, I know the sheriffs. And anyway, it was quite an escapade. So, they let me get out of my truck, and I didn't have any driver's license because that sunk in the river. So I'm maybe like a little bit of a person of interest kind of thing. And it was a crazy experience, because I got out of the car and I was like, I'll show you the back of my truck, and one of the guys got his gun up like this. And finally the sergeant tells me, he's like, look, there was a domestic violence dispute down in St. Mary's, and the person ran up river, and we're trying to hunt him down. And we don't know if he's in the back of your truck or if he's in your drift boat. So can you uncover your drift boat? And I'll never forget this. Like, so the drift boat kind of has like one of those canvas covers on it or whatever, and you kind of roll. And it's not a fast thing, and I'm kind of rolling it. And I can't get one of them to help, which takes me even longer. And the guy's got his gun up the whole time out the back, like ready for this guy to jump. And I was like, there's no one back here. I literally just sunk this boat. But of course, they didn't care about what I had going on. They were one thing. So I get the boat halfway uncovered, and the sergeant's like, we've apprehended the guy. And the helo goes.
And just everybody's like, okay, see ya.
And they were like, we're out of here. There was no like,
sorry to trouble you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just like, we're gone. And they loaded up and they were out of there. anyway, I drove down to camp after that and was just like, completely dazed, like what the heck just happened here?
Yeah.
It was probably one of the most fascinating guide days of it. It
I was
was
going to say in one day.
guide day in one day.
Where were your clients when you got pulled over by the helicopter?
So I dropped them back off at their car. Thankfully,
Okay.
they drove their car back up with me to rescue the boat. Right. So, because we had to go down to our boathouse to get all the riggings to rescue boats. And yeah, they ended up following me up with their car, and they left from there. So
Oh, they did. Did you get most of your gear back, or you didn't get any of your fly rods?
no, actually, so that's a good question. I got one fly rod back the next year.
Oh, you
A
did.
guy was fly fishing, and he was just floating down river, and he found the butt section of a rod, and that's all that he found. There was no reel attached to it or anything like that. But he ended up he called me. He lives out in Seattle and then has a place up on the Joe. And he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to get this back to you." I was like, "Do you want to drink beer, or like I'll take you fishing someday just because you're an outstanding human." Like
Yeah,
I didn't
right.
expect to get anything back there,
You just had your name on it or something. Yeah, I left a fly rod backpacking into a lake in Montana, and on the way out, it was just a day trip. We weren't backpacking. We just hiked up there. On the way out, it was started just raining like sideways. I was with 5 other guys, and we like put our stuff down, got our raincoats out, and just took off running. And we got another mile or two down the trail. I realized I just dropped my Scott 5 weight on the trail up there. And while the rain is going sideways, you guys can hang on a minute while I go back up here and try to get my rod. And they're like, "Are you serious?" Yeah, it's a $400 rod, man. I'm going to run up and look for it, So I run up there and I never saw it. I left a note down at the little ranger station, like covered little thing, and called everybody, and, nothing. And those guys were like, "You're not going to see that again." And I never did. So yeah, you don't know where it is, do you?
No, that seems to be. So I got one quick story about rods getting. So it's happened to 2 of my guides. They leave the rods in the drift boats that we own, and then that the company owns, and they'll drive back to camp with them instead of putting them on those magnets on the car or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So like the rod holders that go into the drift boats, those rods great when you're in the water, but when you're on a dirt road, they flap out of there. And so last year, Dave lost a couple fly rods, and then Kyle, a guy that worked for me for 4 years, he lost like 6 that bounced out of there one time. And then all of a sudden it comes back on. Dave's like, "Why didn't you tell me that they fall out of there?" I was like, "I got a lot to think about here." Like, moving forward, maybe we'll get a sticker, "Dear White Pine Guides, like, do not leave your rods in here during transit on the dirt road, otherwise they won't be there."
Big arrow or something. Oh my gosh. Now, before we go, I did want to hear a little bit more about your story. So you grew up in Colorado, and then how did you end up, in Idaho, married, running a fly shop?
Good question. So, all right. My wife, Sierra, and this is a pretty unique story. We dated when we were in junior high, and we were couple of the year, back in, I don't know, the 90s or something like that. And anyway, we broke up early on in high school, went our own ways, and she went to Colorado State University, got a engineering degree, and I got degrees in partying and fishing and having lots of fun. And
good major.
Good major. And so
worked out well for you.
It did. And when in 2008, I think I ran into her mom because, like, when we were kids, we hung out all the time. I knew her parents very well, and they own a ranch outside of Fort Collins. And her dad taught me a lot about fly fishing and elk hunting.
Wait, did she dump you in middle school? Like in high school? That was it? You got dumped?
Yeah, she dumped me in high school. And it was like, I was in high school. She was still in junior high.
You're lucky to be dating me, and you're dumping me. Are you kidding?
Exactly. Yeah. And it was well deserved.
Yes. All right. Okay.
So she, when I ran into her mom, though, she's like, "Well, Sierra's wrapping up an engineering degree, and you should call her sometime." So I gave her a call, and we started hanging out after that. And I guess this is kind of a funny story. Like, my life was at a different point then. And one night in Fort Collins, I decided to ride dirt bikes around downtown Fort Collins at 3:00 in the morning with a buddy. And we ended up getting into a small dirt bike accident with each other. And I'd got a DUI. And And so I'd ask Sierra, and this circled back to Sierra, right? And we started hanging out, and I was like, "Do you want to come over to a barbecue and then start helping me build Adirondack chairs?" And so I was building Adirondack chairs for my DUI
Really? That was it?
Yeah, that was it. But here's the thing: we did a bunch of woodworking together when we were kids, and she's like, I don't know, she still liked my personality, I guess, and somehow I won her over. And so she got a job though out here in Idaho, and so we were doing a long distance thing for a year and a half. And I'd gone to school for construction management and was working for a big firm down in Colorado and Wyoming, and just traveling. It was like post recession and things were a little bit tight, but like it was like I'd follow the work and just go fly fish. So it's been a lot of time up in Wyoming is where I was based out of, like Thermop area and
Yeah,
River,
sure.
which they got incredible fisheries up there as well. But so Sierra and I started, dating again, and anyway, she's like, "You should move out here to Idaho." And I was like, "Well, I can't like leave. I went to school for construction management, but in my mind, I'd always wanted to guide for a living, and I'm like, at some point, I'm like, I'm going to quit. So I moved out here in 2011, and Idaho was rough. I mean, Colorado was tough post recession, but like Idaho was really hard. And Sierra got a job for the Forest Service doing some engineering stuff. And then I just came out here and started guiding full time. That was kind of one of the jobs I could find, and started guiding big game hunting,
Cool.
whitewater rafting, bass fishing, and some bird hunts for other outfitters out of Riggins. And then went back to school, for another degree in environmental science, and wrapped that up in 2014. And right when I wrapped up, it was like, we had this opportunity from a friend that is like, "Hey, I run a small consignment shop inside of my outdoor shop, but I don't want to do that anymore. Would you guys be interested in opening up a shop if I invest a little bit?" And I'm like, "Yeah, only if I can have a fly shop with it." So we opened the doors of White Pine. It was originally called White Pine Gear Exchange and Fly Shop, with about $3,000 of fly fishing gear. So like Rio, some Reddington rods, and maybe like we found a guy that closed down a fly shop, and there's a company over in Montana that builds those fancy oak fly displays, So
Right.
we went out of business, and we went over to the middle of Washington, and we bought his three fly fishing bins, and I was like, 2 years to fill those up. Well, it was like, it's taken me way longer than that to get. Now we have 6, and we're still working on filling all 6. But when we first opened up, yeah, it was like just small terminal tackle and whatnot. And what I wanted to bring to Moscow was the same thing that I got to experience, like St. Pete's Fly Shop. Grant, that runs that down in Fort Collins,
Sure.
was a good friend of mine back in the day, and I'm like, I wanted to bring that to Moscow,
Moscow, Idaho.
Yeah. And that's what we're based out of, and it's a small college town with University of Idaho in town, and then WSU Pullman is a sister city. So the Cougs are right next door, and that town's, so it's dual college towns right next to one another. But yeah, so we kind of got that going, and then 2017, I got my first outfitter license up on the St. Joe, and Sierra always liked to say that's where luck meets preparation, because there was a permit that was in rotation that no one had claimed on that river, and Sierra and I just put in the time and the work to figure that out.
Wow.
Now, all the other permits that we bought their businesses. And back then, Sierra and I could not have afforded to buy someone's business. So, it just kind of one thing led to the next. And I think taking risks is such an important part of being an entrepreneur. And, and it's like, you just have to, we just grinded, and it's like every year kind of, we grow things out a little bit more. And, to the point now where we run bird hunting operations, multi-day trips. The day trips, we have a camp up on the St. Joe, where we do multi-day stuff, and then our fly shop, we've grown that in. We just had a feature posted in Sims, so highlighting one of our trips on the Grand Rhonde, and we brought Sims into the shop. We were carrying a different brand of waders that I didn't really find that they wanted to collaborate as much, and Sims was really interested in kind of collaborating with us. And so that's the direction that we went. And then we carry Scott fly rods and, quite a bit of other Scientific Angler, Rio.
Yeah.
Douglas. I haven't brought in fly tying equipment yet, but I think we'll do that. But that's a big wormhole, you know. And I guess to top everything else, back in 2019, right before COVID happened, we bought a commercial building in town. So we now own the building that we operate out of. And Sierra's mom came out. She's an artist, and there's like this painting that's up behind me. She does oil painting.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
She painted that, and she came out and did a huge mural on a 50-foot long wall that we have, like a big CMU wall. So she drew, it's kind of Japanese inspired line work and with big trout on it, just like
nice
lines. So, you know, and April 1, the company just turned 9 years old. And I mean, it's great. Like, I feel like I'd like to think that we finally, like, we made it, you know. We have employees, we have, like, it's work, something's working.
Something is. Well, I think you got your personality driving this, I'm guessing. You know, you probably got a lot of clients that really love being with you and coming into the store and everything. And I'm kind of curious, like, what's the best piece of advice you ever got along the way here?
Boy, so I talked to a lot of my clients about, like, work and how do people make it, like, what is it? And they're like, you know, every single one of them, well, Tyler, it just takes work. But I'm going to tell you, Lonnie, that we acquired a couple of the permits that we have. Like, I've called him a few times, like, I mean, a hot mess, like teared up, basically, like, what do I do with my life? You know, just kind of feeling like everything's crashing. Of course it isn't. I'm just scared of stepping into the unknown
in the moment. Yeah.
In the moment, you know. And it's like, I have these people in my life that I really rely on when I feel like everything is just, of course it's not. And it's like, Lonnie's like, you know, Tyler, it's going to be a rough 4-wheel drive road. And he's an architect, well-educated guy, but he's like, you just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep grinding. And, you know, the last, like, really good piece of advice too that was given was, oftentimes we spend, you know, it's nature to spend a lot of our time on the products that aren't producing, like, widgets, right? Like, bottom 80%, the clients and the people that really help push things forward, it's like they're pretty much aren't a lot of maintenance. You build out really good relationships with them, and it's like, well, why am I putting all this time towards this side of the business? And I'm thinking more or less our consignment side sometimes. But it's like, the important thing is, like, weaving all those together and not getting too bogged down by one thing or the other. You have to be diversified to make it all work in this industry nowadays, you know. And when one thing isn't really shaking out as well as you want, you got another business.
Yep,
that you can kind of move things around and make it all work.
And you're guiding upland birds and some hunting and doing this fishing, and you're steelheaded and all that stuff. I wanted to ask you before we go, we're running a little bit out of time, but about your dad, because I remember you were telling me that your dad used to pull you out of school to go do some of the stuff that you're into now. Like, tell me about your dad. What kind of a influence he was on
Oh man,
you?
My dad's like, so yeah, real quick, he used to pull us out of school from 3 weeks up to a month a year when I was in public schools, and like, well, we're going elk hunting, and just
That's
like,
great, really,
you know, and we pack in on horses and set up camp the week before. Oh, we're going to Wyoming to chase deer. We're going fishing here. And it was like fishing and hunting all the time. And when I got a little bit older, I was like, I don't like this life anymore. We grew up on a small 20 acres outside of Fort Collins. And I was like, I wanted to do all the things that a lot of my other friends were doing, like going to Mexico and all this cool stuff. And I'm like, I was getting to do all these things.
You were doing cool stuff now, looking back.
Yeah. And eventually, like, little did I know that would lead me down the road to do what I do for a living. And that's what my dad always wanted to do. Is like, I want to guide, I want to outfit, but he was like, you know, he's in the construction industry too. And it was too lucrative for him to leave. And he, like, never could make that jump. And I was like, I try to live life without a lot of regrets. And I'm like, if I do the same thing that he taught me in another world, which was construction, building things, right? I was like, I can be very successful, but like, am I gonna live that life, like, true to heart, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, and it was like, I just rekindled some things with him. I was back running trap lines with him in around Christmas time and stuff he used to drag me on when I was like, he paid for diapers running trap lines when I was a little kid. It was like crazy, pretty wild. I had spinal meningitis when I was a little kid and deaf in my right ear.
That's serious.
Like, my parents were in pretty big debt for a long time, and it was like, just scrambling, like, it was like, shoot, my dad got a welding degree and was just like working construction back in the 70s for a couple bucks an hour, and just like
Yeah.
persevered through all that and had debt. So he's like, he was finding other ways where he could have fun, but also make some money, and running trap lines paid a little money.
Running trap lines, that made enough to buy your diapers, huh?
Yeah, made enough to pay basically. So
the healthcare bill. Oh my gosh. Yep. Well, what a story. And you said something about being in a rodeo, and it sounds like you survived that. Was that a long-term thing, or were you just
it was on and off. It was on and off.
I mean, you're a rider in the rodeo?
Yeah, I rode bulls on and off for a while, and then Sierra and I, when we started dating this last go run, like after, like I said, like as adults, she's like, if you get hurt riding bulls, I'm out of here. And so I was like, I'd rather spend time with you. And I was never very good at it. I was just like the adrenaline rush.
Did you really? It looks insane to me. Like watching these guys and these huge, how much do they weigh? 1,500 pounds or something landing on you? I mean, can't you die out there?
Absolutely. I think it's just like when you sat down on the bull and you're getting the rope tightened up, there was so much chaos everywhere around you, and you had to do everything you could to like
focus,
and it's kind of press like in that moment. And then that if you made it the whole 8 seconds, that focus that comes in that when there's all this background noise going on, it was pretty amazing, because I have pretty bad ADHD too. And I'm like, if I can get my mind to like do that, I feel like I'm in the right space,
That's really cool. All right. Before we go, your favorite places to get a bite to eat and something to drink at the end of the day after you've been out guiding or fly fishing, where do you tell your clients to go? Where do you go?
So up in Avery, there's a TFP's, a little pizza joint that's amazing. And then Dan, that owns a fly shop across the street, the Idaho Fishing Company, he makes pretty good sandwiches, but it has dynamite ice cream, so huckleberry milkshakes. And if you come to Idaho, you gotta have a huckleberry milkshake.
A huckleberry milkshake. Huckleberry, that's like an Idaho thing.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely an Idaho thing. And those are the two. There's a new restaurant. I just met the new owner down at the Big Eddie. We used to spend a lot of time there, and then it went through, changed hands. But the new owner I went in there just to talk business with him the other day, and he's completely gutted the whole place, and he's like gentrifying it a little bit. So I'm excited to go eat his salad.
We'll see then. All right. And then I heard you mentioned your shore lunches, some of those tacos you're doing. Anything else you love to do for shore lunches?
Boy, it's like, we do, some quinoa and some hard salami. I try to do pretty nice lunches, but so probably the ahi fish tacos, or we do like I'll Traeger smoke pork butts on the Traeger for like 12 hours, and then we pull all that apart and put it in bags, and then I warm it up on the stove, and so it's pretty quick. It's not like I'm making all of it out there, right? It's all. And that's got some rice and just like little street tacos are kind of interactive and whatnot.
Yeah, street tacos. All right, I'm writing that one down. That sounds like a good one. Cool. Hey, man, great having you on the show, Tyler. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, you bet. How can people get in touch with you?
You can find us online at White Pine Outfitters. Search Moscow, Idaho, and or Instagram. It's White Pine Guides.
Okay.
Those would probably be the best. And of course, you can call the shop at 208-883-3900. You very rarely talk to me anymore, but Shelby, our shop manager and guide, she kind of takes care of all the booking stuff and answers any of those questions. So,
all right. I wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow, Tyler, and I'm sure you will have many. And folks, thank you for listening. We'll be sure to post Tyler's contact info in the Destination Angler show notes and some great pictures he's going to send me about from the St. Joe and maybe some of his top fly patterns. And we'll put those up on our Facebook and Instagram pages. As always, you can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig@destinationanglerpodcast.com. Hey, if you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain, a great little band out of Fort Collins, Colorado. Did you know that? You know those guys?
No.
The Fountains? Yeah, they grew up here in Carmel, Indiana, where I'm from. And anyway, they live in Fort Collins, making some good music out there.
They have really good music down in Fort Collins. I missed that.
Do they?
Music scene.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
It was good.
Only been there once. Hey, hope everybody enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.